Hi, and welcome back to A Smarter Way to Retire. I'm your host, Tony Leonardi, and today we're diving into step 9 of the retirement planning process, measuring your current probability of success. This is where the rubber meets the road. All of the work we've done in the first 8 steps will come together here in step 9. Let's look back a bit. You've defined your goals, you've built your financial model, measured your tolerance for risk. You've thought deeply about longevity, analyzed your investments, but now how do you know if your plan is actually on track? How do you know if your plan is actually going to work? That's where step 9 comes in. Retirement planning isn't just about saving and investing. It's about ensuring that your money lasts as long as you do. Many people assume that they're all set for retirement, but without measuring your probability of success, you might be missing critical risks. So this step helps answer the question, am I going to be okay? And isn't that the question that we all have? Am I going to be okay? Is my family going to be okay? And if not, what adjustments need to be made in my plan to make it work? So what factors go into measuring your retirement success? Here are the key components that we'll analyze. Your expected expenses, how much you plan to spend annually, including essential and discretionary expenses. Remember in step 5, we talked about needs, wants, and wishes, the 3 priority levels of expenses. How about your income sources? Social Security, pension, rental income, withdrawal from savings. What's the right level of withdrawals to make your plan work for you? Investment returns are a key variable. What rate of return your portfolio is likely to generate over time, and how do you measure that? Inflation and taxes. The impact of rising costs and taxation on your long-term purchasing power. Inflation has been a hot topic of discussion over the past few years. And have you accounted for increased inflation in your plan? How about longevity risk? We talked about this a few weeks ago. How long your retirement might last based on family history and personal health. Each of these factors that we discussed in the first 8 steps of planning plays a role in determining whether your assets can sustain your lifestyle for the long haul. This is why it's so important to dive deep into each step, as they each play a critical role in your long-term probability of success. One of the most effective tools for assessing probability of success at this stage is the Monte Carlo simulation. I know for a lot of people, Monte Carlo sounds a bit like, gambling. Isn't Monte Carlo just a fancy place in Monaco to bring your yacht in the summer? Yes, but it's also a very powerful way to stress test your retirement plan. A Monte Carlo analysis runs thousands of potential market scenarios to estimate the likelihood that your plan will succeed. Instead of assuming a single rate of return, it accounts for market volatility. Because as we know, investments don't move in a straight line. Monte Carlo analysis is a powerful tool because it helps us to prepare for uncertainty. We know the markets will be volatile, we just don't know when that volatility will hit. A Monte Carlo runs thousands of simulations using different market conditions and different market scenarios, from smooth sailing to stormy seas, helping us see how a portfolio might hold up over time. So while we can estimate how much market volatility to expect in your portfolio based on historic data and risk assumptions in your current portfolio, we can't predict when it will happen. A major downturn early in retirement can have a much bigger impact than one later on in retirement. Imagine for a minute going through a major recession and a market downturn in your first few years of retirement. The markets are down 20, 30, 40%, and you're simultaneously pulling money out of your accounts to pay your bills. You can imagine the snowball effect that you can be stuck in. We actually have a name for this. We call this sequence of return risk. Now imagine that the same recession happens near the end of your retirement, after you've had 20 or 30 years of nice, healthy returns and you've built up a substantial portfolio. A recession will always hurt. But at this stage of the game, it may not have much of an effect at all on your probability of success. That's why building a resilient plan, one that accounts for different market conditions, is so important. Monte Carlo doesn't guarantee outcomes, but it helps us stress test a plan so we can make informed decisions about risk, spending, and long-term success. I like to think of Monte Carlo analysis like a financial crystal ball, or as close as we can come to a crystal ball, except instead of magic, it's just a lot of really smart math. So what will Monte Carlo tell us exactly? A Monte Carlo analysis might tell us that based on your plan and all of the variables that we accounted for in the first 8 steps, you might have, let's say, an 85% probability of not running out of money. That's a very strong position to be in. But what if your analysis comes back with a 50% probability of success? That's where adjustments need to be made. We would like to see you ideally in the 70 to 90% probability of success range. That would be ideal. But what if your plan doesn't align? Let's say the results show that your plan has a probability of success lower than 70%. What can you do? Well, you can adjust your spending, maybe reduce discretionary expenses in a downturn or in a recession. How about change your retirement age? If you're not yet retired, maybe you can work a few extra years to improve your outlook, or work part-time, perhaps. How about reallocate your investments? Are your assets working efficiently for you? Or you can increase your savings if that's an option for you. Are there opportunities to save more before retirement? Usually the answer is a combination of these. We'll talk more next week about making adjustments. Now, the goal isn't to chase after a 100% success rate because life is uncertain, but rather to create a plan with a strong probability of success while allowing for some flexibility. In fact, a plan with a 99 or 100% probability of success still has risk in it. Well, what risk, you ask? Well, I like to call this risk the risk of underspending, the risk of sacrificing too much, the risk of being too conservative. I often see people in retirement being too conservative, being afraid to spend money, being afraid to take that dream vacation, even being afraid to go out and buy a cup of coffee because it's too expensive. One of the best parts of my job is when I see a client with a very high probability of success, so I have the pleasure of encouraging them to spend more. I had a client recently that was in need of a new car, and after a careful review of his plan, which had a very high probability of success, I really enjoyed helping him to discover and agree that he could and should get the car of his dreams. He has since sent me pictures of the car, and I can see how happy he is with his new vehicle. That purchase would not have happened, I believe, without a Monte Carlo analysis. That I'm sure of, because he didn't have the tool to measure whether he can afford that type of vehicle or not. The Monte Carlo analysis really helped him to make that decision. So it's also important to recognize the trade-off between risk and return. If your probability of success is low, below 70%, you might be tempted to just seek higher returns in your investments. But remember, increasing your expected return also necessarily increases volatility in your investments. More volatility can actually decrease your probability of success because of sequence of returns risk and when that volatility might hit, especially early in retirement. So a balanced approach is always the key. So a few final thoughts. Measuring your probability of success isn't a one-time exercise. It's something that we monitor regularly and adjust as needed to keep you on track. Retirement planning is dynamic, and the more proactive you are, the more confident you'll feel about the future. In our next episode, we'll dive into the final step of the process, making necessary adjustments. Because even the best plans need fine-tuning. Thanks for listening, and as always, if you have any questions or want to run your own probability of success analysis, feel free to reach out. If you've enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, share, and please leave a review. And don't forget to check out my book, A Smarter Way to Retire, for a deeper dive into the whole process. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.
Securities and investment advisory services offered through Osaic Wealth, Inc., member FINRA SIPC. Mosaic Wealth is separately owned, and other entities and/or marketing names, products, or services referenced here are independent of Mosaic Wealth. The opinions expressed herein are for general information only and is not necessarily the opinions of Mosaic Wealth or its representatives. Investing is subject to risk, including loss of principal invested. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. No strategy can assure a profit nor protect against loss. It is not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. Please consult your financial professional, attorney, or tax advisor with regard to your individual situation.